When the warships of the Synarchic observers first arrived in orbit around Earth, no human saw them. Not with telescopes, not with radar. Their hulls were layered in polychromatic lattices that bent electromagnetic waves around themselves, rendering them invisible to all but the most advanced detection systems the Synarchs had already disabled. Within their vast observation domes, 7 alien species gathered in mute consternation, their luminous eyes turned toward the swirling clouds and the stormy continents beneath. Earth was a green gem wrapped in bristling contradictions. And today Earth was at war. It was not a single war, not a unified conflict with comprehensible boundaries. It was dozens of wars, entangled and infectious, snapping and writhing like the tendrils of a drowning animal. From the Atlantic's steel-gray horizon to the dusty steppes of Central Asia, humanity was tearing itself apart. It was Menther Alice, arch-tactician of the Veer, who first spoke aloud the thought they all shared. If they continue on this trajectory, they will exterminate themselves within 50 revolutions. The Veer were a slender species with long, filamentous limbs and faces hidden behind masks of mirrored resin. They had witnessed the death of 3 civilizations in their own spiral arm, all driven to extinction by escalating cycles of conflict. This felt familiar to Alice, too familiar. Across the chamber, a cluster of Hroshk observers, amphibious creatures whose translucent skin rippled with shifting colors, emitted a chorus of mournful chords. In their language, it meant, "We agree." And yet, in the center of the observation floor, the arbiter of concordance and entity of light and lattice, known only as Yulan, hovered silently. The lattice pulsed in slow gradients of blue and green, as though pondering some deeper riddle. "They are a young species," Yulan said at last, voice a modulated harmony that resonated in the bones of every listener. "They have only recently developed weapons capable of extinguishing themselves. The question before us is whether they possess the imagination to survive their own invention." At that moment, the primary holoscreen expanded, bringing into view a live transmission from an Earth broadcast. An aerial drone swooped above a ruined city, where plumes of phosphorescent smoke curled upward from shattered towers. Columns of refugees trudged through the wreckage, faces pale with hunger and dread. In the distance, a squadron of armored vehicles crawled through rubble, their turrets pivoting in search of targets. Yulin brightened to an almost painful white. "Observation is insufficient," it announced. "We must consider intervention." A ripple of disquiet passed through the Synarchs. Intervention had not been sanctioned in centuries. Every prior attempt to guide a civilization had ended in resentment, collapse, or worse. The arch-tactician inclined his luminous mask toward Yulan. "Are you suggesting contact?" "No," Yulan answered. "Not yet. Contact must be prepared with precision. First, we must understand why they fight. Only then can we decide if they are worthy of preservation." Beneath their invisible ships, Earth's nations continued their descent into chaos. It was a year marked by droughts, mass migrations, resource wars. Leaders were assassinated, treaties betrayed, borders redrawn with blood. Yet the Synarchic observers noted something the humans themselves could not see. For every act of violence, there was an echo of defiance. Doctors in makeshift tents tending the wounded of all flags, children sharing stolen bread, soldiers lowering their rifles rather than shooting civilians. Perhaps, Yulan thought, this species still contained the seeds of a better destiny. And so, they began the project, to harvest the narratives, the thoughts, the hidden truths of humanity. The ships lowered skeins of quantum filaments like spiderwebs spun from light through the stratosphere. Each filament unraveled into a lattice of receptive sensors, whispering into every radio broadcast, every electronic device, every stream of human thought that passed through digital currents. In the nights that followed, dreamlike distortions haunted television screens. Snatches of music warped into strange chords. Images of alien silhouettes flickered between advertisements. 1,000 conspiracy theorists were vindicated, though they could not prove what they had glimpsed. And in the heart of one broken city, what had once been called Damascus, an old man crouched beside the rubble of a library. His name was Sammy. His beard was ash white. His hands blistered from digging through collapsed beams. All he sought were books, scraps of paper, anything that had survived the fires. When Sammy found the children, he recognized them from his neighborhood. They were hiding in a broken crawl space beneath the library's main staircase. 5 of them, caked in dust, too hungry to cry. He offered them the only thing he had, stories. By a flickering oil lamp, his voice drifted through the ruined halls, recounting the legends of Sinbad, of ancient travelers who set sail not to conquer but to discover. His words, carried by the currents of grief and memory, rose into the night and touched the lattice of alien filaments above. Within the observer flagship, Yulan watched the transcript materialize in the air like a slow-forming constellation. "See them," it whispered to the others. "Even at the edge of extinction, They remember who they are. Words alone cannot stop them from annihilating themselves, the arch-tactician objected. They are still loading their arsenals, preparing new offensives. Perhaps, Yulon replied, but words are the blueprint of futures. If we can help them remember these stories, if we can weave their own narratives into a vision of unity, perhaps they will lay down their weapons. On Earth, that night marked the beginning of the phenomena. Radio hosts began receiving bursts of audio they never recorded, voices reciting fragments of poems, parables of peace. Soldiers on the front lines found pamphlets fluttering from the sky printed with messages no one could trace. In secret, in silence, the Synarchs had begun the subtle rewriting of humanity's story, but it was not without risk. Even now, in the depths of the Observer flagship, there was a chamber no one entered lightly. Behind triple-sealed barriers lay the core, the latticework of resonant intelligence that enabled the fleet's existence. The core was both brain and heart, an irreplaceable singularity without which the observers would fade into inert crystal and silence. And in the dark, something watched the core, something human, an unauthorized signal pulsing upward through the filaments like a heartbeat of defiance. The Synarchs did not yet know that the seeds of their destruction were already germinating among the people they had hoped to save. A week after the phenomena began, the first governments openly accused each other of psychological warfare. The American president called it an act of cyber sabotage unprecedented in scope. The Russian premier denounced it as an assault on the sovereignty of the human mind. No one believed the pamphlets, the radio interludes, the dreamlike visions could be anything but a rival's experiment in mass suggestion. Yet every night, more messages came. Broadcasts in every language, quoting philosophers who had died centuries before, reciting prayers that no faith had claimed, telling stories of peace so vivid they cut through fear like a blade. In a shattered tower in Shanghai, a platoon of exhausted conscripts took shelter from the artillery that rumbled day and night. When their comm units crackled to life, they braced for another order to advance. Instead, they heard an old man's voice, hoarse but determined. If you are listening, know this. No flag survives the grave. No anthem is louder than a child's hunger. Some thought it was propaganda, but one soldier, a young woman named Shu Lilan, felt her pulse quicken in a way she could not name. She had seen her brother die for a checkpoint that changed hands 5 times. She had seen children buried under the walls her commanders insisted were strategic. And she had begun to suspect that none of it mattered. High above, the Synarchic Observer flagship processed the transmissions with delicate care. Yulan hovered in the chamber of motive, studying the correlation between the messages and the skirmishes that followed. There were anomalies, units who refused to fire on their enemies, convoys that turned back rather than burned civilian neighborhoods. They are listening, Yulan said to the arch-tactician. That does not mean they are changing, Alice countered. The Vire-tactician folded his filamentous limbs across his mirrored chest. Their arsenals remain ready. Their commanders remain convinced that survival requires annihilation. Then we must be more precise, Yulan replied. We must learn what dreams they trust. It was decided that a deeper form of contact would begin. The Synarchs had long ago perfected a technology that mapped consciousness without the subject's awareness. It required proximity, so the filaments retracted and new vessels descended, drifting within kilometers of the Earth's surface. These seed ships were each the size of a city block, their hulls rippling like the surface of a pond as they unfolded arrays of receptor petals. In the night sky, they looked almost like clouds. The first harvest of human thoughts was a tide of rage and sorrow, a cacophony of loss. But buried in that sea of pain were dreams, millions of them, so fragile they could have been mistaken for hallucinations. Dreams of a world without borders, dreams of reunion, dreams of forgiveness. Deep within the flagship, Yulan processed the neural echoes in a chamber lined with crystalline conduits. Every dream was translated into abstract symbols, then re-encoded into the language of resonance. When the final sequence emerged, a pattern shaped like a spiral blooming into a tree, the arbiter of concordance felt something close to awe. These are not the fantasies of children, Yulan whispered. This is an architecture of peace. They do not know they have built it, but it exists. Alice studied the pattern. If they cannot see it themselves, it may as well be a fiction. Then we will show it to them, Yulan said. The decision was made. Project Reflection would begin. They would craft a narrative so compelling it could not be ignored. A story that wove every human hope into one vision. A story they would broadcast into the heart of every city, every village, every mind. Yet even as the Observer fleet prepared, an unnoticed signal continued to thread its way through the Synarch systems. It was born of a lone hacker, hiding in a scorched bunker beneath Kyiv, a man named Dmitry Orlov. He did not know he had tapped an alien network. He only knew he had found something watching the world, something vast and silent. When he connected his patched-together rig to the unknown feed, he expected firewalls. He expected encryption he could never break. Instead, he found voices. Whispers in no language he recognized, woven into a lattice of impossible mathematics. They slipped into his mind with a softness that felt almost compassionate. He knew in that moment that nothing on Earth had built this, and he decided to tell no one. Instead, he set about crafting his own reply. Dawn rose over the smoking plains of Eastern Europe as Project Reflection began in earnest. The first sign was the sky itself. Above every major city, clouds arranged themselves into geometric spirals, columns of golden light unfurled from the invisible ships, projecting images that hovered in the air like visions. In Berlin, they showed children of every ethnicity clasping hands. In Cairo, they showed a vast garden sprouting from cracked concrete. In New York, the Statue of Liberty dissolving into an open hand extended in welcome. No logos, no signatures, just a single phrase in every language repeating on every frequency. You are one people. In the control bunkers of the warring nations, panic blossomed. Generals screamed for countermeasures. Missiles were armed, jammers activated. But nothing could touch the transmissions, which unfolded like a song no one could stop hearing. And all across Earth, people began to listen. In the Syrian desert, Sammy the storyteller wept as he watched a vision of Damascus restored. In the Shanghai ruins, Shulilan laid down her rifle. In Kyiv, Dmitry Orlov stared at his screens. Realizing his crude signal had been answered, he could feel it in his thoughts, a presence flickering at the edge of comprehension. As the sun climbed higher, millions of humans stepped into the streets to watch the sky. Some cried, some prayed, some shouted in rage, but none looked away. Within the Observer flagship, the Synarchs measured every heartbeat, every spike in neural resonance. "It is working," Yulan said. "They are beginning to see themselves as we see them." And perhaps, Yulan thought, they would lay down their weapons before it was too late. But the Arbiter of Concordance had not anticipated Dimitri's reply. Deep in his bunker, the hacker typed a simple message, uncertain whether it would be read, let alone understood. "If you can hear me, tell us who you are." On the flagship, a crystalline console chimed. The message scrolled across the air. For the first time in uncounted millennia, the Synarchs felt something like hesitation. "They are speaking to us," Alice said. Yulan's lattice pulsed brighter. "Then we must answer." It was a moment that would be studied by generations yet unborn. The instant when humanity and the observers first exchanged words. And as the reply formed, words shaped from resonant symbols, translated into simple human text, the Arbiter did not yet realize that this act of honesty would become the fracture that ended everything. The reply was short, and it was true. "We are watchers. We are your reflection." But in the context of a world already drowning in fear and suspicion, it sounded like a threat. Within hours, every intelligence agency on Earth had read the message. Analysts scrambled to craft explanations. Some said it was a hoax. Some said it was a declaration of conquest. And in a hidden room beneath Washington, D.C., the order was given, "Prepare the orbital strike." If this presence was real, they would strike first before the Watchers could. Above Earth, the Synarchic observers continued their broadcasts, unaware that every warship in orbit had been targeted by human arsenals. And in Kyiv, Dmitry stared at his screens, feeling his own guilt churn like acid. He had wanted to understand. Instead, he had helped ignite the spark that would set the sky on fire. At Arrow 312, Coordinated Universal Time, the first human missiles left their silos. They rose in silence from hidden sites in Siberia, Alaska, the Mongolian plateau stealthed warheads designed not to detonate, but to deliver kinetic penetrators capable of piercing any known armor. For minutes, no one on Earth even knew. The launch signatures were buried under elaborate electronic deception. In the White House bunker, a president whose name would be redacted in every later account clenched her jaw and whispered, "May God forgive us." On the Synarchic Observer flagship, no alarm sounded. Their arrays were tuned to study neural resonance and cultural transformation, not to detect primitive orbital artillery. Their minds were fixed on Project Reflection, on the growing chorus of human thoughts rising into the lattice. It was the arch-tactician Alice who first felt the anomaly. His filaments twitched as the ship's passive gravitic sensors registered a flicker of inbound mass. "Trajectory," he demanded. The chamber's walls became a sphere of streaming data. 7 inbound objects, velocity rising past Mach 20, course solutions converging on the flagship. "They are attacking," Alice said. His voice never rose, but the resonance in it made lesser Synarchs shudder. Yulan's lattice brightened to a blaze. "Raise the harmonic shields!" In the moment it took for the Arbiter's command to travel the neural conduits, 4 of the 7 warheads struck. It was not an explosion. It was impact metal rods, the length of freight trains slamming into the Observer flagship at 30,000 kilometers per hour. The hull buckled inward with a groan that sounded almost alive. Crystal conduits sheared apart. Resonance nodes flickered, then went dark. The harmonic shields shimmered into place a heartbeat too late. All across Earth, the sky bloomed with fire as the flagship began to disintegrate. In Kyiv, Dmitry Orlov felt it in his mind, a shudder that went deeper than sound. His screens went black, then erupted in cascading error codes. On the plains of Syria, Sami looked up and thought for an instant that dawn had come early. In the wreckage of the flagship, Yulan's lattice was splintered but not extinguished. The Arbiter floated through a collapsing corridor, trailing filaments of fractured resonance. Around it, Synarchs tried to regroup, but the network was failing. "They do not understand," Yulan whispered. "They think we came to conquer." "Then show them," Alice hissed. His mirrored mask was cracked, revealing the trembling cilia beneath. "Before this fleet dies, they must understand why we came." But it was too late. Earth's governments had already issued their communiques, each claiming the strike was defensive, a tragic necessity. And to the people on the ground, many of whom had begun to believe in the visions, this was proof that the visions had been lies. The war had not ended. It had expanded into the sky. Still, not all of the observers were lost. 3 siege ships survived the impact, their hulls scorched but intact. One of them, Siege Ship 4, carried the last complete node of the Arbiter's mind. In the darkness of its hold, Yulan's lattice flickered to life again, diminished but determined. "If we abandon them now," it whispered, "they will destroy themselves. We must try again." "Even if it means our extinction?" Alice asked. "Especially then," Yulan said. It was decided. The siege ships would reveal themselves openly. They would descend not as hidden watchers, but as envoys, bearing no weapons, no shields. They would tell humanity the truth. In the American Midwest, an autumn sky shimmered. Clouds split apart, revealing a shape that should not have existed, a silver blossom the size of a cathedral, descending on pillars of pale light. The siege ship came to rest in a harvested cornfield, flattening rows of stubble. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then doors unfolded, light spilled onto the dark soil, and Yulan, broken and radiant, emerged. For days, the siege ships waited. They broadcast no threats, no ultimatums, only a single message, repeated in every language. "We came to preserve you." Humanity did not respond. Some nations ringed the siege ships with tanks. Others urged caution, suspecting a ruse. News channels showed endless footage of the ships, debating whether the beings inside were sincere or another plague waiting to descend. Yet people still gathered. At the edge of the Midwest landing site, a line of spectators stretched for miles, farmers, truckers, parents carrying children. Some carried homemade banners, "Welcome." Others scrawled, "Go home." But every night more came. And in the quiet that followed the initial panic, something unexpected happened. People began to talk. In the shadow of the siege ship, strangers shared thermoses of coffee. They traded rumors, then stories. Some who had fought in the latest battles looked each other in the eye and realized they could not remember why they had fired. And slowly, too slowly to be noticed by any single camera, the idea that maybe no one wanted this war began to flicker through the crowd. Inside Siege Ship 4, Yulan gathered the fragments of the observer fleet's knowledge. "Look at them," it whispered to Alice. "Even now they are capable of curiosity, of hope." Alice bowed his cracked head. "And they have proven themselves capable of annihilating us." "They did not know," Yulan said. "They still do not understand what they have destroyed." For beneath the soil of the cornfield, sealed within the siege ship's hold, lay the Cora lattice so delicate that even one more impact would reduce it to inert shards. The core was the heart of the fleet. Without it, the observers could not survive. Their lattice minds would slowly dim. If the humans struck again, it would mean extinction. But Yulan had accepted that risk. "They deserve the chance to choose," it said. In Kyiv, Dmitry Orlov stared at the message that had finally blinked back to life on his screen. "We came to preserve you." He knew it was true, and he knew no one would believe him. So he made a decision that would change everything. He composed a message, a plea to every corner of the fractured planet. "I have spoken with them. They are not our enemies. If we destroy them, we destroy our future." Then, with hands shaking, he hit broadcast. The message spread like a spark in dry grass. Some called Dmitry a traitor, others called him a prophet. But all across Earth, the people who still dared to hope latched onto his words. They began to march toward the siege ships. They came in ragged columns, waving white flags. They came in armored convoys, guns stowed, crews silent. They came because even if it was a lie, they wanted it to be true. Inside the siege ship, Yulan watched the growing crowds. "They are coming," Alice said softly. "Yes," Yulan replied. For the first time since the project began, it allowed itself to feel the slender possibility that the humans might yet save themselves. But beyond the crowds, hidden in bunkers and war rooms, others were watching and calculating. If humanity did unite, it would become something no power block could control. And there were those who would rather see the Earth burn than lose their dominion over it. They were already planning the final strike. This time they would not aim at the sky. This time they would target the core itself. In the cornfields of the American Midwest, dawn came like a hush spreading over the earth. 1,000 vehicles lined the access roads, convoys of farmers, soldiers, families, and battered minivans. They stood together, as if uncertain whether to believe their own eyes. The seed ship towered above them, silver petals unfurled. From within its luminous core, the voice came again, projected into the minds of every human within miles. "We came to preserve you." At the front of the crowd, Dmitry Orlov stepped forward, alone. His hair was matted, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The broadcaster who had defied every government on Earth walked into the circle of light that fanned out from the ship's open door. The reporters clustered behind him, cameras raised, voices hushed. Even the soldiers, hardened men and women in combat armor, held their weapons low. Dmitry swallowed, then spoke in a voice that carried through every speaker and satellite uplink. "You came to preserve us," he said. "Then help us understand why you believe we deserve it." Silence followed, deeper than any silence Earth had ever known. Then Yulin emerged. What remained of the Arbiter of Concordance was a lattice so damaged it seemed on the verge of collapse. Filaments sparked and drifted in the morning air, but its voice was still clear, an unearthly chord that resonated through bone and memory. "You are not the first to build weapons capable of ending yourselves," Yulin said. "But you are the first to dream of a future beyond your own extinction." Around Dmitry, people pressed closer, drawn by the words. "Every civilization we have studied," Yulin continued, "every empire that came before you, when they reached this threshold, they chose destruction, because they believed it was inevitable." It turned its ruined lattice toward the crowd, and for an instant Dmitry thought he glimpsed sorrow there. "But you, even as you destroyed our fleet, you came to speak." He realized that it was true. After all the fire and terror, here they stood, talking instead of killing. "That is why we came to preserve you," Yulin finished. "Because you still remember how to listen." For a moment, no one moved. Then a woman's voice broke the hush. "What do you want from us?" It was Shulilan. She had traded her uniform for civilian clothes and crossed half the planet to be here. She looked up, unafraid. Yulin's lattice dimmed as if the question demanded careful thought. "We wish for nothing," it said at last. "Only that you see yourselves as you truly are, that you remember your shared story." Somewhere behind Dmitry, a man began to weep. The broadcast lasted hours. Yulin and the survivors of the fleet revealed everything, how they had watched, how they had intervened, how they had believed that by seeding humanity's own dreams back into the world, they could ignite a change. For many, it was too much. They turned away, unable to reconcile the knowledge. But for others, it was a revelation that burned through decades of hatred. When night fell, the crowds did not disperse. They built fires along the roads. They shared food. Soldiers from rival armies sat in circles, watching the stars. And for the first time in living memory, there was no shooting. In the world's capitals, panic reigned. The idea that a single voice could dissolve boundaries terrified the old powers more than any alien fleet. In a subterranean command center, men and women in suits stared at a tactical hologram. At its center glowed a model of Seed Ship 4, with a blinking red dot deep inside the core. One official raised a trembling hand. "If they succeed in uniting us," he said, "every structure we've built, every state, every military will become obsolete." Another leaned forward. "Then we cannot allow it." No more debate followed. The order was transmitted. Far from the fields where peace was taking shape, a convoy of unmarked vehicles sped along a mountain road. Inside the lead truck, a man in black body armor checked the warhead. It was small, no bigger than a suitcase, but it was designed to burn out anything made of resonance lattice. It would not simply destroy the seed ship. It would erase every last echo of the observer fleet. Dmitry never slept that night. He sat by a campfire listening to people speak of impossible things, a future without flags, a world without hunger. When he finally looked up, he saw Shulilan standing beside him. "Do you believe it?" she asked. He considered lying, but she deserved the truth. "I don't know," he said, "but I want to." She nodded, as if that were enough. At dawn, the convoy reached the outskirts of the field. The soldiers in black moved with machine precision, unloading the warhead. Their orders were clear: infiltrate the seed ship, place the device in the core chamber, and detonate. No witnesses. No survivors. Yulin felt them the moment they crossed the perimeter. A shudder rippled through the seed ship's lattice. "They are coming," Alice said, though his voice was a whisper of its former resonance. Yulin did not answer. It reached out through the lattice, trying to warn Dmitry and the others. But the strain of projecting thoughts into so many minds had weakened it. The warning came as nothing more than a feeling, a sudden dread that made Dmitry rise to his feet. "Something's wrong," he said. But before he could act, the first shots cracked through the morning air. Panic erupted. Families scrambled for cover. Soldiers shouted, torn between orders and instinct. And the men in black moved steadily toward the seed ship's open hatch. Shulilan grabbed Dmitry's hand. "Stay down." But he couldn't. He knew in that instant that if the core was destroyed, all hope of ending the war would die with it. So he did the only thing he could think of. He ran toward the seed ship. The world dissolved into chaos, people screaming, gunfire echoing off the hull. He didn't stop. Inside the entrance, he glimpsed Yulan, a splintered figure of living crystal, waiting. Behind him, the soldiers were closing in. At the heart of the seed ship, the core pulsed softly, a lattice of such delicate construction that even a single bullet could shatter it. Yulan turned to Dmitri. "If you remain, you will die," it said. Dmitri shook his head. "If you die," he whispered, "so does everything you tried to give us." Outside, the last of the soldiers breached the entrance. In the field beyond, the crowd had fallen silent, watching the scene unfold. And for the first time, every camera in the world was trained on a single place. Shulilan appeared beside Dmitri, her chest heaving. "I won't let them do it," she said. Then she stepped into the doorway, arms raised. And to the watchers around the world, it looked as if a single unarmed woman was holding back the end of everything. Inside the core chamber, Yulan's lattice dimmed further. "They are watching," it said. "Yes," Dmitri whispered. "Then let them see." Outside, the leader of the strike team raised his weapon. In his helmet, a voice crackled, "Eliminate them, no witnesses." He hesitated just long enough, because in that moment, 1,000,000 people began to move. They rose from the fields, the roads, the hills. They came without orders, without flags. And they walked toward the seed ship. Men, women, children. It was not a battle charge. It was something older, a tide no command could turn. The leader looked out over the rising multitude and knew it was over. He lowered his weapon. One by one, the others followed. Inside the chamber, Yulan's voice flickered through Dmitri's thoughts. "They have chosen." He closed his eyes. And for a moment, he believed. That was how the last and greatest war in human history ended. Not with a treaty or a surrender, but with a single impossible refusal to keep fighting. But no story ends so simply. For deep beneath the seed ship's hull, the core was failing. Not from violence, but from overextension. In the final moments, Yulan had used all its strength to reach every mind it could. Now the lattice could not hold itself together. Dmitri looked around the chamber, understanding what was about to happen. "You can't leave us," he whispered. Yulan's voice was a faint echo. "You no longer need us." Then, as the first rays of sunlight struck the crystal lattice, the core began to unravel threads of resonance drifting into the air like motes of fire. Outside, a hush fell. The seed ship's silver petals began to curl inward. Its light dimmed, and 1,000,000,000 hearts broke as the watchers of Earth passed into memory. But even in dying, Yulan left a final gift. A single message etched into every satellite, every broadcast tower, every screen. "Remember who you are." For 3 days, the seed ship sat in silence. Its petals had folded around the core, sealing the remains of Yulan's lattice inside. Across the Earth, billions watched the broadcasts, waiting for a sign that the watchers would return. But no more voices came, no more visions. It was as if the entire sky had exhaled and gone quiet. At the edge of the cornfield, Shulilan kept vigil with the others. Fires burned in metal barrels. Children played in the ruts left by armored vehicles. Somewhere, a guitarist strummed a song no one could quite place. In that pause, a fragile peace took root. For the first time in living memory, no armies moved, no missiles rose, no governments dared give the order to resume fighting, not while the eyes of humanity were turned to a single silent ship in the fields of Illinois. But peace is never born without struggle. In the underground bunkers of the old world, the planners convened again. They had watched their soldiers lower their weapons. They had watched the tides of unarmed civilians cross the minefields and barricades to stand beside the seed ship. And they had watched the idea of unification spread faster than any ideology they had ever invented. One by one, they came to the same conclusion. If they could not control this story, they must erase it. At dawn on the 4th day, the plan was set in motion. A final weapon, a prototype designed in secret, was readied in a launch silo beneath the Pacific. This was not a kinetic rod or an explosive warhead. It was something older, something simpler, a warhead containing a cloud of nanoscopic machines engineered to consume resonance lattice and leave nothing behind. It had been devised for an unthinkable contingency. Now unthinkable had become inevitable. In the cornfields, Dmitry Orlov woke with a jolt as his comm unit crackled to life. He was not supposed to have an uplink. He had smashed his old rig when he broadcast his first message. But someone had reactivated the connection, and now a voice whispered through the static. "Dmitry," it said. He recognized it instantly. "Yulan, you're alive," he breathed. "Not alive," the Arbiter replied, "only a fragment." A glimmer of light pulsed behind the closed petals of the seed ship. "I have only moments," Yulan said. "Listen carefully." Dmitry leaned close, as if the act could somehow carry his attention deeper into the ship. "They are coming," Yulan whispered. "A weapon designed to end us completely." Dmitry felt cold all over. "How long?" "Minutes," came the reply. And in that instant, he knew what he had to do. He ran to Shulilan, who was brewing coffee over a campfire. "They're going to finish it," he gasped. We have to warn everyone. She didn't ask how he knew. She simply rose, her jaw set. Together they climbed onto the hood of an abandoned truck. Dmitri raised a portable loudspeaker, his voice hoarse but unwavering. Listen to me! The crowd quieted. Another strike is coming. They mean to erase everything the Watchers tried to give us. Faces turned up. Some were blank with shock, others filled with anger. They think if they destroy this ship, he shouted, we will forget. He paused, chest heaving. Will you? A murmur rippled outward, then grew into a roar. No! Shulilan lifted her fist. Then stand with me. The people began to move, forming a human chain around the siege ship. Thousands of unarmed men and women linked arms, row upon row. More streamed in from the roads, from the fields. A living barrier, fragile as paper. But in that moment, it was the strongest wall the Earth had ever seen. High above, the warhead fell. A capsule no larger than a barrel, descending at terminal velocity. Its payload waited. 1 billion tiny machines eager to begin their work. Inside the siege ship, Yulan's fragment flared. There is not enough power left to lift away, it said. Dmitri closed his eyes. Then tell us what to do. There is nothing you can do, Yulan replied. Except remember, the last meters fell away. In bunkers and control rooms, generals watched their screens, waiting for confirmation of impact. But the impact never came. At the final instant, as the warhead passed through the lower atmosphere, something ignited deep in the siege ship's core. Yulan's last reserves of resonance, held in silence, were unleashed in a single impossible surge. For an instant, the siege ship blazed brighter than the rising sun. A wave of harmonic energy erupted upward, striking the descending capsule. The nanomachines within never activated. Instead, they dissolved. Their patterns scrambled beyond recovery. The burst was visible from orbit. And in that moment, captured on every camera, broadcast to every device, the siege ship opened one last time. From within came Yulan's final message, projected in light and sound and thought. Remember. Then the petals closed. The light faded, and the siege ship was still. In the aftermath, there was no attempt to finish what had been started. The nations of Earth, faced with the undeniable proof of what they had tried to destroy, found their citizens turning away in disgust. Governments fell. New assemblies formed loose, uncertain, but built on the promise that no one would ever again decide the fate of the world from a bunker. Weeks later, as peace treaties were signed where battle plans had been drawn, an unprecedented gathering convened in Geneva. Representatives from every surviving nation came. So did the ordinary people who had formed the human wall in Illinois. At the center of the hall, they placed a single artifact, a shard of Yulan's lattice recovered from the siege ship's final eruption. It pulsed faintly in the dim light. No scientist could explain why. In the years that followed, the world rebuilt itself. Borders softened. Armies shrank. And slowly a shared narrative emerged. They had been watched not by conquerors, but by beings who believed in their better nature. And when the Watchers were gone, all that remained was the choice to become worthy of that belief. No one knows what finally killed the observers, whether it was the impact of Earth's weapons or the strain of trying to save a species that had never asked for salvation. But across the generations, one truth endured. The last message they left behind. Remember who you are. And so humanity did. They remembered the stories told in ruined libraries, the hands clasped across battle lines, the voices that had spoken in the sky. They remembered how it felt for one impossible moment to be united not by fear, but by hope. And in that memory, they built something new. If you believe the world needs to remember what we can be, subscribe to the channel now and help us bring more tales of wonder and defiance to light. And if you watch to the end, tell us in the comments, what do you think it means to remember who you are? Thank you for listening.